Jeremy, who is in a state of deconstruction?
Carillion, the vast outsourcing firm, which is no more, basically, leaving a lot of its subcontractors bust, and a lot of people wondering if they're going to get paid, and small businesses going out of business. And the government kept giving them contracts despite the fact there have been profit warnings. And basically, we've been missold PFI. What happens these days in the neoliberal project is that the government just gives the private sector loads of money to hide borrowing, to hide debt, and hide the fact that it's actually spending any money. But the money has to be paid back to the private company over time. And it isn't about hostility to the private sector per se. I mean, some things should be run like businesses. Businesses, maybe, should be, but not prisons and hospitals and schools. And if you're a school, right, you think, all right, not everything can be done by the public sector. So, you know, there might be some tiling that the school caretaker can't manage. So you get sort of like Dudley Ceramics to come in and do your tiling. But you don't outsource school dinners to a private security firm. Because a dinner lady should be a sort of maternal, sturdy woman with large arms and an eye for an underfed kid who needs an extra dollop of mash. Not somebody considered too violent to work in an asylum removal centre. Theresa May said, well, a third of this was done under Labour. And then Corbyn should have said, yeah, that's kind of why I'm the leader now. But he resisted saying that. Because because Major did a bit. Major didn't do much of anything, really. He was only Prime Minister for a bit because the country said, is anybody in the country not Margaret Thatcher? And he said, I'm not. They said, all right, you've got 4 years. So he had 4 years. And he didn't do. And then New Labour came in and they just were so intoxicated with the private sector. They were like, oh my God, I met like this hedge fund manager and he was like so amazing. He had like cufflinks, I'm not even joking. He had like a pink shirt, not like red sock in whitewash pink, I mean actual proper pink. And he said like, I'll take over and run the country. It was so amazing, it was so inspirational. And so Labour just started this weird, just handing everything, bringing them into every aspect of our lives. And now we're left with this absolute wreckage. But if you say that, then you're hostile to private enterprise.
It does sound like you're being deeply unpatriotic.
Yes. One of the hedge funds that bet against them, which is a weird thing where these hedge funds make money out of betting on companies, gave the Tories £50,000 for their election fund. Yes.
It's probably all above board, though, isn't it? I mean...
I'd never heard of Carillion before last week. Is that bad to confess?
It's a made-up company.
I thought it was Marillion. I was like, well, no wonder they've gone bust. They haven't had a hit for years.
How do you feel about all this, Daliso?
Well, I heard that it is a very complicated situation, but to me it seems very simple. Because essentially we have a construction firm who promised certain services, kept taking money despite not carrying out the work. That seems to me the same experience of every person in England who's ever hired a builder to do an extension. And I think the solution is simple. They just need to hire a Polish guy from down the block to sort it out in a week. It'll be great.
I think you're being too hard on yourself, Jeremy, by saying you seem hostile in your case against Carillion. I'm not sure Theresa May fared much better in persuading us of the merits of private sector outsourcing at PMQs this week. I mean, PMQs is terrible at the moment. It's incredibly dull. Every crisis, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn managed to turn into the most boring episode ever. Like, Jeremy Corbyn managed to make the NHS crisis boring the other week, and he succeeded again with Carillion. But Theresa May doesn't seem to believe in her government's own policies. So, I mean, one of her answers was, I'm not going to answer the question because you didn't ask one. But most of her answers about what the value of the private sector were, well, it's good to have them, and that was about it. So I think you could have done a much better
job. He said there's one rule for the rich and one rule for the poor, and then all the Tories applauded that. I think they got... They misunderstood.
He was just pandering.
I mean, it's embarrassing for the government. It's embarrassing for Chris Grayling, who is still the Transport Secretary and seems to have the sort of opposite of the Midas touch.
Chris Grayling's amazing.
He is a survivor,
no
isn't
one's ever made me feel like this before. He actually makes me miss Stephen Byers. Is that fair?
When I was young, about half the economy was in the public sector, and you thought, that's probably about right. All the essential stuff was in the public sector. People like Richard Branson in those days were sort of quite colourful. You thought, yeah, he's good, because he's got a record label, and he's got record shops, and that's great. You think, because you wouldn't want a Labour council to be running the record shops, because all the records would be by Pete Seeger, you know, so you think... So that was about right. And then now Richard Branson, the lovable music business guy, is now suing the NHS for not giving him enough stuff of it to do. Then people talk about extremism and that, but it's really it's the extremism of the market, dare I say.
Because he said it's either a racket or there's a lot of denial going on, isn't it? I mean, like... They must have known it was going down the pan. It's like saying to Harold Lloyd, why are you hanging off a clock? And he's like, what clock? I mean, that is a lot of denial, isn't it? I mean...
The chair is Philip Green. It's called Philip Green as well, isn't he?
But he's not.
He is.
No, there's another one. They've basically just everybody who's disreputable in private...
Slowly turns into Philip Green.
Yeah, there's just going to be one name, which would make it much easier. What are we against? Philip Green.
Do you know what the Institute of Directors called the bonuses that the executives of Carillion originally got?
What? Splendid.
They called them highly inappropriate.
But nonetheless enviable.
Yeah. This is the collapse of the PFI construction giant Carillion. The government failed to notice all the apparent signs that the company was headed for a collapse, including several profit warnings, spiralling debts, a hooded skeletal figure with a scythe standing in the corner of all of their board meetings, or the fact that their CEO's last visit to Downing Street was heralded by hundreds of black cats drowning themselves in the Thames, which then turned to blood. Still, you can read too much into things, can't you? Carillion ran 50 British prisons where inmates were shocked to be summoned by the governor on Monday morning and told that while some of them could apply for positions in other penal institutions, they were sadly going to have to let the rest of them go. As well as prisons, Carillion also builds schools, which are essentially the same thing. At the end of the day, the walls have to stand up to the demands of a dirty protest, whether it happens in Ewing or double geography. 2 points to Jeremy.